Hey, fellow streakers, we have got an exciting show for you today. We have Chris Dancy with us, and he is the most connected human in the world, and we're excited to have a conversation with him. I'll tell you, today is something we've looked forward to for quite a while. So, Jami, let's get streaking.
Yay! I'm so excited, Chris, to have you on. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thank you. I think this started back in October with our first communication.
Yeah,
it was. Let me give just a little bit about Chris for our streakers that are out there. He is touted as the most connected man on earth, and the world is watching those connections carefully. For 25 years, he served in leadership with technology and also healthcare industry, specializing in the intersection of the two. Chris entered the public dialogue concerning digital health as the media started to focus on wearable technology, which, Chris, we know you wear a lot of different technology. We're excited about that. He has been on several news programs, podcasts, and everything else. We're excited that he's taken the time to talk with us today. And as you know, streakers, we've got the 3 laws of streaking, which are 1, make it laughably simple. 2, no record, no streak. And 3, create a community. Where we thought we'd focus with Chris today is in law number 2 on no record, no streak, because he has absolutely everything that you could have to track where he is in his life and getting the data from him. So we're going to do that, as well as community, I think is an important one as well. So Chris, let's just get started right with the first question. How did you get into tracking and really getting all this data on yourself, and what made you want to do that?
Not gonna lie, it was genetic. My mother, I'm 53. My mother in the 70s and 80s, I grew up with her. She was a list maker. She was a calendar creator. So every year at the end of the year in December, we'd go to Hallmark. There were Hallmark stores back then. I think there still are. And she would get the free calendar, and she would meticulously, with me, have me read last year's birthdays and other things, and she'd put them in the next year. She'd also go back if there were significant events and like re-put them in so they become anniversaries. And this all just was normal to me. I never really thought much about it. Fast forward now to the year 2001. I'm slightly over 30. My life is kind of a hot mess. And my mom sends me these giant boxes of, like, I don't know what was in it. It was for Christmas. I opened them up, and she had literally cataloged the first, I think, 15 or 16 years of my life every single day. Wow. I never even knew about. So my part of the story, we talk about later on, but the origin story, mom.
It was mom. It was mom that basically got you there.
It was mom. Basically, keep it simple. It was mom.
And I love that when I listened to a podcast, I think it was Whitney Johnson's podcast, and then reading in your book, and you talking about the emotions that you felt as you opened that book. And even to the point that I think you said at first it was a little overwhelming, like you didn't even go through the whole book. But
I still haven't.
You still haven't?
And
so, and you had mentioned just that it helped you to recognize that even though sometimes you felt like your mom wasn't always present, you recognized that she was always, in a way, present in your life. She was following you everywhere you went.
Yeah. So my family, like a lot of families, we weren't rich, but we weren't poor. But my mom worked like 2 or 3 jobs, and we were that house that kids weren't allowed to come to because there was no adults there. That house on the block. Like, you can't go to Chris and Chuck, my brother Chuck's house. But it overwhelmed me at times because I was like, well, why is my family so different? But to this point, again, when I received these archives from my mother at a very critical point in my life, I was like, wow, she was always paying attention, and I could always pay attention. It's like, and that's kind of where this awakening in me came from, of like, to no record, right?
Right.
I was just like, wait a minute, where am I? Could I do this for myself? How could I do it for myself? My whole computer brain started ticking at that point in 2001, 2002, right. But 2003, I started getting serious.
Yeah. So as you were getting serious and talking about it, you started to incorporate technology into keeping a record of every part of your life, right? Yep. Walk us a little bit through that.
So I had always been, again, just because of my mom, very record keeping centric. So in the 90s, all my computers, and going even back up to the 80s, I collected, my records were in a database. But in the 90s, I started becoming really, really super careful about email. So I would just save a copy of all my emails, the really important ones. I stepped in folders, all the simple stuff people do normally, but I just have been doing it for a long time. by the early 2000s, when I got like, wait a minute, I have a lot of information about my life. Wouldn't make sense to someone else. It became this quest, in the early 2000s to, well, what is a life? What is a life and where would you find it? Right? Is it the stuff on the shelf? Is it the clothes you buy? Is it the bank transactions? There's so many records of who we are and what we value. And I think the most important thing I did, Jeffrey, in the beginning was just, how would you sort it out? So I literally used Maslow's hierarchy of needs and started saying, what parts of my life, whether it's spending or healthcare or etc., are available to me on devices. At the early 2000s, I didn't have a smartphone, I had a digital phone, my computer, my bank transactions. There's so many places you can find bills, like electricity usage is a big one for like how you're living. And I just started stitching it together slowly but surely until 2008, when this thing got really serious. I started creating an interface for my life that I could actually search and get like a snapshot of each day. And that's kind of where most people in my story picks up. But I wanted to kind of go back a little bit further for most people, because a lot of people will be like, so you just thought about saving your whole life? I'm like, no, like you, my life's being saved anyway. It just wasn't accessible.
Right.
Exactly. I llove that thought too, that our lives are being recorded anyway. It's not like they're not being recorded. Something you said that, you said something, this may be a little bit of a tangent, but you said you can learn a lot from your energy bill. I think I heard that right.
Yes, it's true.
What can you learn from your energy bill? That's curious to me.
I mean, so I'm someone who, again, because I've always kept track of my bills, in the early 2000s, I actually started keeping track of the wattage. So wattage is tied to square footage and a lot of other things. It's also sometimes tied to stuff beyond your control. If you have a large family and someone turns up the air conditioning, not turning up the, or didn't turn down the air conditioning, turn the heat, that's usually gas. But just I hate to say that, but your level of vivaciousness comes from your energy consumption. So oftentimes you'll find when your energy bills are higher, not because of something artificial, you're usually in a better mood. So we consume more. Yeah, we consume more of everything, whether it's volume on the music or, taking an extra long, hot shower with the radio on, or we just consume more. So electricity is always a big, I always say to, especially people that are like, hey, I think there's something going on with my spouse. I'm like, well, are you using more electricity? No, we're actually using a lot less. I'm like, everyone's depressed. I just sorry, I didn't mean to go down a tangent, but like there's no piece of your life that isn't telling you something about your life, but yet we walk around like, what's wrong with me?
So I've had a question that I've been wanting to ask, is that as you keep track of all of these things, how have you overcome the desire to not want to accept the reality of it? Does that make sense? Like, you have data on everything in your life, so you
and everyone.
And everyone. So
including you guys.
Including
us. This is the first time in my life that I'm like, I wonder how much data he has on me. I mean, is there very much out there? I don't even know.
Yeah, I mean, every email and in our meeting we had last year, and I think we had a reschedule at one point too.
Yep.
And then every time we have an interaction, I put a feeling on it. So I have a feeling score from 1 to 10 on how that interaction made me feel. So
wow.
I actually actively weed out people and institutions that don't inspire me.
Oh, that's great. And that's something that you started more recently, isn't it? Recently,
yes.
Meaning like in the last 10 years where you're like, okay, is it a way of weeding out what's important to you? Kind of saying, look, this is how it made me feel. I'm not going to waste time on the stuff that's not making me feel better about life.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer that one second. I'm going to go back to your other question about avoiding. So yeah, if I have a bad night's sleep, I don't look.
Okay. So there are times you just don't look.
I can't.
Okay.
I mean, I know myself well enough that will just pervasively ruin the entire day.
That's what I was asking, is I'm like, how are you gathering all this information and dealing with the reality of it? Because there's times that I'm like, I don't want the reality. Let me live in my little fantasy world that this, for food, this doesn't have calories today, that kind of stuff. But
I can't tell you how often I have to like hide the top of the screen that gives you the calorie total.
Yeah.
Like I don't not log. I just don't look at the countdown or count up. Okay. And the great thing about our phones is usually with all of these apps today, there's a way you can really scroll through, like you can see me scrolling. So I just put on the one I can take for that moment.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So back to your question. So recent. So if you think about my journey again, in the 2008, 2012, everything got written to a Google Calendar up until that point. It was very simple, and it sounds not simple, but it's really simple. Like if you get an email, you can there's a little software program that'll put a copy, not the whole email, but just like who it came from on your calendar. So you can start to see your whole day. But by 2013, 2014, 2015, like our phones got to be a big deal. So like, where's the repository of your phone? So I started exploring some phone repositories for health, right? We all know that, like steps, sleep, etc. Behavior, like how much music you listen to, how many meetings you're going to, how much money you're spending. Behavior is different than health.
Right.
And environment, these kind of 3 buckets. And then those buckets would filter up. But now I'm going to answer your question. Sorry, I'm really terrible at like not hearing someone and going, okay, but to get there, I have to go back here. By 2016, 2017, I met someone. So it became really important to me to say, okay, this is all great. I love these buckets and all this categorization, and I like but it ain't going to work if you have a family. I was single to this point. Like you cannot track stuff if everyone doesn't agree that it should be tracked. Because my first rule, of living is we don't know how to measure what we care about, so we care about what we measure.
Yes.
So it was like, okay, with my spouse, but wasn't my spouse at the time, but like, what do you care about?
Right.
And that became this whole kind of newer world of like, well, what are our values as a family, and how do we measure the things that would roll up into those values?
That is.
I can give you an example.
Please do.
Please, yeah, we'd love that.
Yeah. So it's kind of fun. So what we did was, as a family back in 2016, we just stopped and thought about, well, is my screen showing?
Yes. It's showing beautifully.
So this is our family dashboard. It lives in the kitchen. It has our actual values. So they are things like health, home, and this is the order they go in: health, home, work, financial service, etc. And these values, then, if we have any type of, let me go ahead and roll over into the value screen. If we have anything related to our family that we need to do, whether it's $1 we need to spend or a task we need to complete, these values then are linked back to who we are as a family. So in this case, we had all of our entities, our pets, etc. And those entities are then linked to these values. And then these values are linked to everything from transactions to tasks to projects to communications, or what we call interactions, to our accounts, to our assets. So if we buy something, right, there's actually you have the transaction of that asset, but you also have, let me give you a better layout of this, but you also have, well, what was it used for, and how was it used, and when did you use it, and what's really important. And what's crazy is so much of this stuff is really easy to start to stitch together when you think about, well, this is coming from the bank feed, and when we bought it off the line, and a web clipper can pick it up, and I just think so much of what we're doing today, we're just leaving like behind us, and there isn't a way to stitch it together. All this to say, if you don't have a value set, don't bother measuring.
So true. In fact, that's one of the areas where we talk about a lot in streaking is, who do you want to be? What are your values? What are the things that you're aiming to get to? And then what do you do consistently in order to get to be that person? And as I looked at, man, I had 13 questions as I was looking at exactly what you're saying.
Sorry.
No, it's perfect.
I
love it. Because what I wanted to ask, so when you got married and how did you introduce your spouse into tracking your life? Because that's one of the things that honestly a streaker has a difficult time with is, okay, now I'm going to start tracking every single day that I wrote at least one sentence, or that I, made this dollar of a transaction. Mm-hmm. So how did you bring your spouse into it and to say, you know what, this works? Or was there an initial resistance, or what was that like?
It was hard. Well, first it's hard because I had the unique challenge of you can Google me. So when I start dating people, they Google you, and they wouldn't find you on Facebook. They'd find you in Newsweek. Right. They wouldn't find a video of you eating ice cream. They'd find you on Showtime, right?
Yes,
so
exactly.
There's that whole crazy I had to deal with. But then once you get through that, it really comes down to most people track. Most people streak anyway. They just don't talk about it.
Exactly.
They streak in a closet, right? And I think you really need to embrace your streak and embrace what you value. If you're someone who values taking screenshots of someone you're not quite sure is going to stab you in the back, okay, you've got trust issues, right? We just need to, what does your streak mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how do we accentuate, is that someplace you want to be or someplace you want to be from? Because you can reverse or unstreak.
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
Unstreaking is just getting rid of bad habits.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in bringing it in bringing your spouse in, then it was probably long conversations. I mean, was it
very long conversations, understanding what my spouse streaked at the time, but then more than anything, like focusing on how does my spouse successfully streak. So in this case, I'm someone who's very into the creation of the record and the management of the record and all those other types of things. Very, type A level stuff. My spouse is not. My spouse is someone who's very into thinking of, well, what did this mean to me? And how, so where I like task, my spouse likes intentions. So another example, when we have like a weekly review of like what we did as a family, we don't have like a task list we over. We have a sticky board where we sit down once a week on Sundays. We go over the things we did good, not so good, and things we'd like to change last week. And then next week, we talk about the things we'd want to do, visualize, internalize, or actualize. And they're always on colored stickies that link to the actual values themselves. So again, let's talk about that. We could have a task list. We could have all the data in the world, but that doesn't work for my spouse. What works for them on understanding the structure and what our brain works and having feelings around those things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think a good streaker or just a good human being alive in this decade understands that technology has a way of wrapping and adapting to what we value and not the other way around. So many people become the apps on their phone instead of being the person they are and changing the apps.
That is so good. As you said that, my daughter does ballet, and she came home from one of her classes one time, and she was so excited because her ballet teacher they'd had some other dancers in class that were dealing with some anxiety issues and some different stressors that were happening. And the teacher had sat them down and said, we have all of these things in our life. We have anxiety, we have these stresses, but it doesn't mean that you have to be that. Even if you've got a diagnosis, even if there's a label around it, that doesn't mean that you have to be that thing because you're necessarily feeling that thing. We have the ability to decide. And that's what I feel like you're saying is the same thing with the apps, these tools that are there that are meant to help us. And I think you've done a fantastic job at being able to evaluate when a tool is helping and then how to say, okay, this tool isn't helping, or how can I make this tool adapt to what I want it to do, rather than exactly what you're saying, that we adapt to the tool. So, and I love... Go ahead.
Well, think about it. No, I hate to interrupt you, but like, this is so important that people understand this. I wish I could just get this, besides my mantra, we don't know how to value it. If someone gives you an interface, whether it's a book or an app or a computer, you have no choice but to become their version of you. There's no way. It's impossible, right? You don't get to repaint art. You have to take it in the way artists create it. What's no different when you're using a logging app or sending an email? If the email prioritizes replying to all, you reply to all and ruin everyone else's day except for the person you meant to send it to. You know what I mean? So we need to freaking get the autonomy back from the devices. Technology is not inherently evil. Our lack of thoughtfulness is.
Just allowing the technology to take over and not...
Because it's simple. I just did what it told me to. Well, really? Like your mother told you to... I don't do that whole thing, but if your mother told you to jump off our bridge, would you do it?
You're going to do it?
Everyone did it? Yeah.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. And one of the things that we found difficult, just a little side note, in building the streaking app, we've been trying to build in the methodology, which is part of it, but then the flexibility for people to adapt streaking to who they are. We always say to them, look, don't allow other organizations or apps to define your streak. You define your streak. You define what it is. When Jamie and I started this whole streaking journey, we started with learning about the Streak Runners Club or the United States Running Streak Association. And they defined a streak as run at least 1 mile daily. And what I love about Jamie and what she did is she said, you know what? That's not really my streak. My streak is to do this. So she took the principle and the concept of what it was that what they were saying, but then she said, my streak is to run or walk at least 1 mile 6 days a week. That's my streak. So in technically, we don't belong to the United States Running Streak Association because we don't meet their definition. Now, this is not to diss on them, but it was cool to say, wow, we just took control of that. And what you're telling us is you can take control of your technology and your data, and it's incumbent that you do it. You should absolutely do that.
It's the most important thing every family can do this decade. Do not hide the phones. Do not put away the computers. Do not do it, right? It's like, it ain't going to get easier, right?
Mm-mm.
But talk about, like, why did you do that? I mean, we have a 10-year-old that stays with us frequently, Fernando's sister-in-law. And I'm sorry, my sister-in-law. And just like a tech utopia, right?
I bet.
Once she, like, I mean, the whole house responds to like speaking and mood and the whole bit. But once she got used to it, she didn't want it, you know? And I always tell people, be careful what you're trying to avoid. It will eat you.
Yeah. I've seen that in moms, I'll just say it out there, people that ban sugar from their children. I'm like, I've watched children devour sugar at times where their parents aren't there because they know it's the only time they get it. And I love what you said about talk about it. That is my big thing with talking to parents and technology is I love what you said, that it's not going away. We can't avoid it. It's just getting more a part of our lives. And so it's imperative that we talk about it, and not be so afraid to talk about it, not be so afraid that by bringing it up that it's going to make things worse for them or they're going to get into places that they shouldn't get to, but to be able to use that technology. And that's what I have so loved as I've been reading and studying is that two things I've loved. I love your ability to use technology, but it seems to me that every question you have in your life, you have developed some way to say, okay, how can I collect data on that and answer that question? So it seems any question you've had about yourself or about anything, your brain seems to think, okay, how could I collect data on that and then use that data to understand better?
Use and not weaponize. All right, because
I
went through a period where I weaponized some data. I mean, but I'm not going to lie to you, right? You can use this. I think for me, again, cybernetics 101, right? There's an organism like a human or something that's living, and there's a piece of technology. It can be glasses. It can be this. So this is a band I normally wear, but I'm not going to wear during the interview. This listens to me and gives me a score on the words I'm using. Was I happy? Was I sad? Was I harsh? Etc. How we respond in interface with technology, right? The cybernetic principles of feedback loops is super important. And what people, I think, don't sometimes consider is there's no difference between the accommodations of carrying a phone and the accommodations of using eyeglasses, or the accommodations of someone who might be sight impaired and have to use a cane, right? Accommodations are accommodations. Yet we don't tell our children that their devices are accommodations for who they are. Right. And how they friend and how they are, we don't talk about that. We don't say a credit card is an accommodation, but it is. And I think the more we kind of get behind the veil of that's not me and say, well, that is me, I think the world would be better. I mean, right now, it's just being more honest. What I do online is different. Well, no, it's not.
It's not.
It's not.
It is you.
So as you've collected this data on yourself, so you've used that data. I guess I have two questions. One, what inspired you to be able to use that data to change? Because in your book, you talk a lot about how as you learned more about yourself, you were actually able to make health changes, relationship changes, all kinds of changes based on things that you learned about yourself. And my second question is, how did you not get overwhelmed with all that information and feel like you had to change everything all at once?
I did. So yeah, but I literally did. That literally happened. Like 2013 almost crushed me. I think just, phase one, like, to the second law of streaking, it's just collecting it is usually enough to kind of jog you a little bit, So once you realize your phone has steps and others and sleep and all that, you're like, okay, this jogs me a little bit. Step two, I think, really comes down to like, well, what do you want to do with it? And that kind of, your first question and your second question are so linked because you can become overwhelmed.
Right.
The problem with collecting information isn't that it's, once you get the hang of it, isn't that it's hard. The problem is, well, you can change anything. That's the problem. Potentiality crushes more people than any amount of success.
So do you mean recognizing that you're like, I really have the power to change this? Like,
it will ruin you. It will ruin you.
It's both freeing and terrifying at the same time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because listen, I mean, but like everyone else with the pandemic, I would love to drop 10 pounds that I picked up during the pandemic. I could do it tomorrow without thinking. I've got the best tools, the best systems. I know exactly how to do it. but I don't want to be crushed by the potentiality of fixing myself right now. I just want to feel like everyone else. And this is the wrong time in January, almost February 2022, to be walking around like life's so good. You need to have some relationship to other people. So be a little chunky, maybe fall off the wagon, whatever you need to, and just kind of admit it.
So
Because
do you feel like having all of this information and going through this process has helped you to accept things a little bit more in life, accept who you are, and then make better decisions about, okay, I'm going to change this, but not right now, or do you know what, I'm just going to accept that?
Jamie, I am so far away from where I was maybe 7 years ago, where if something was wrong at anything, I had lots of metrics and graphs. I still have these dashboards. I just don't change them now because, again, there's a certain amount of satisfaction and discomfort. And I still don't like discomfort. I'm no fan, but I'm like, okay, this is awkward. I mean, I journal and log. So I built another system after my spouse and I got together where I was able to like start to log my actual feelings. Is this screen showing?
Yep.
Yes.
So in the mornings I come in here and I ask me to pick an emotion. And again, my spouse is not a big wordy person. So I had to come in here and say, well, I had to like allow them to type in more. So for me, I created this giant excited emotion picker. So you can just type in words, then kind of like a rating scale, and then it can type. But just being able to come in and then have our feelings cataloged. And then because my spouse doesn't want to feel responsible for their feelings, I built in a tie to the moon cycle. Not hard, but again, we now blame bad days on the moon cycle. Just between you and me, it's not real, but it works, right?
Hey, if it works.
I think what is real is we all need just something in our back pocket to say, this isn't totally me.
Exactly.
I've
got the moon cycle.
Combining kind of your streaks with other things, kind of correlation's not causation. Well, it is when you need it to be.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And again, I think if you get to know the people you love, your friends, your spouse, your kids, through their streaks, and if they make you uncomfortable, that's okay. I mean, you're getting to know them. And what other time you're going to have, who's going to just open up rambling and say, I am so afraid to go on this podcast with people who professionally talk about collecting things because I'm a fraud. Or whatever the thing is your mind tells you. Well, like, yeah, I don't care. It's like, at the end of the day, record collecting and documents do one thing for you, nothing else will. It proves you were here.
Wow. Question for you. And this is two things have come to mind. You live your life intentionally. I mean, with everything you do on a daily, weekly basis, it is highly intentional. I mean, am I assessing that correctly? Would you agree with that? I mean,
I just got chills when you said that. Like even like the wall behind me is intentional. Yeah. And before the pandemic, I didn't think anyone would ever see that. Right. Like this has been here since I've got the house, like in 2018. To me, intentionality is really almost divinity in motion.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, wow. If God could speak through us, through some way, none of us can. It will be the things we do that we don't think anyone will notice, but they're there. And if there's one thing my mother always impressed upon me, and to this day I understand it, is leave things in such a way that people will know how you loved, whether it's how you put your dishes in the sink, or the Scouts call it leaving the camp better than you found it. But to me, intentionality has to be so wicked that it's outside of time itself.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just such a beautiful thing. So I love that you notice the intentionality because I am crazy about it.
The intentionality of the wall behind you, every single one of the things that you have on there, you intentionally placed because it created either emotion or a memory, or it was a record of some sort. I see off to, it's my left, but it might be your right, where you have, it looks like a family tree. Over there. Over there. Yeah.
So the whole wall is dedicated to time. Time is something that's my greatest passion project in the whole world, living outside of time, looking at alternative time. So instead of chronological time, chronos, looking at non-logical time, kairos. The Bible talks about kairos time. But this is a clock that goes around once per year. You can see right now it's past 12 o'clock. It's heading over to the green. So on the solstices and the equinoxes it hits. Over here, this clock goes around once per day. So right now it's coming up to solar noon, or solar noon will be in the middle, and it'll go back around. Across the top are time travel posters, places you can go in time. And then the charts, this chart and this chart over here, they're all actually charts. They tell you the information you would need to be in that sort of time. So for me, just constantly having a reminder when I walked in to do work that I don't have to be in time, I can be around it.
Yeah.
And we all sense it now because of the pandemic. Everybody's kind of had this skewed sense of time.
Right.
So, again, streaking is just your time personified. Mm-hmm. Your time has no personification outside of streaking. Yeah. None. You don't exist.
Yeah.
Right. Mm. And I think once we kind of come to terms like what time means to us, we can like start to do cool stuff with it. Last thing, let me just say this real quick.
No, you're right there.
My spouse is significantly younger than I am. I'm 53. My spouse is 30.
Okay.
Because of the age difference, I had to be very deliberate and intentional about a lot of decisions we've made. One of those decisions and one of those functions is the fact that I probably may not live as long as my spouse.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I expect my spouse to remarry and love again. Mm-hmm. So that means I have to love my spouse in such a way that the person who takes my place meets my standards.
That's an interesting way to think through. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like kids, right? You have to love your kids in such a way that when you're gone, they basically would do your bidding.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to put it like that dark, right? And I think it's just...
Or at least represent you well.
Exactly. That's all I'm saying. Sorry about that. But I just think there's such an intentionality about time you don't get to live in.
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts. One of my beliefs is that we are eternal beings living in a temporary existence, and so it's foreign to us.
Mm-hmm.
Time is foreign to us, and when you talk about living outside of time, it's one of the areas where I've thought quite a bit about. There's the time matrix that is wildly popular in a lot of different time planning areas, and I don't think it's a time matrix. It's an activity matrix. Mm-hmm. What are my activities that I'm doing that are going to be beneficial for my spouse, for my family, for my children, for my interaction with them, all of that for my family and friends, for this interaction? That's where I start to look at it and say, well, I want to be intentional about what it is that I do, then the activities I spend time doing, which is where all of streaking comes in, is my streaks are what I choose to intentionally do consecutively, because those are the things that are going to get me to where I want to be with Jami, and I love that you talk about children so much, 7 children that we have. And
I love children. I just hasn't been fortunate yet.
It's wonderful. And that's the type of intentionality I want to live. It's so inspiring. You provided, just such, I was feeling the tingles as well inside of myself, just in looking at it and saying, let's be intentional and recognize it and do what we need to do in order to become who we want to be, and become set it up so that the people who we interact with can be who they want to be.
Yeah. I mean, so they can have a template for it. One of the most interesting streaks, I've never shared this anywhere, but one of the most interesting things I literally found a book, and that's what inspired me to check it, was serendipity. So I logged every time there was coincidence, serendipity, deja vu, literally things that were like, this is almost divine. Like, how did all of this just happen?
Right.
And what's really strange about logging things that are kind of outside of like, well, that doesn't make any sense to anyone else, but it affected you, was you start to go, wow, I'm not in this alone.
Yeah. There's a
lot of people read the Bible and all sorts of religious texts looking for proof or looking for faith, when all they really need to do to go, okay, that was not me.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so true.
That was not me.
I just can't tell you how much I love that all of this is coming as you've kept a record of your life, that through keeping this record, you're able to, okay, so just for a second, a mind blow to me. You're keeping a record of serendipitous events that are happening in your life. That's amazing.
Well, I'm cheating. I found a book. I can probably scoot around the desk and get it for you. I found a book years ago. I actually have a bunch of them. I send to people randomly now, especially when they're depressed, saying just keep track of this. Because again, I've never thought of that. I
Right.
never thought of like, well, that's kind of a coincidence. Because coincidence, so first step is deja vu, like, oh, I feel like this. Next one is
Right.
kind of coincidence, but then serendipity, right? So
Mhm.
there's almost a non-linear timeline of significant kind of emotions we have. Serendipity is a big one.
Right. Right.
So I was like, okay, this is kind of important. So like even this morning when I went to your guys' website, I was looking at the app and the book and all of that kind of stuff. I thought, okay, so they have a lot going on, right? A lot.
Yeah.
And somebody needs to make sure that they know that it's noticed. And that's, I think before we even went on camera, I made sure you guys knew that. And it's just like, that's like intentionality plus like keeping track plus like just being there. So I don't know. Sometimes I feel crazy.
You're not crazy at all.
No.
Not at all. In fact, I want to go back to an experience that we had when the iPad was first introduced to the world. I talked to Jami and I said, Jami, I want to get every single one of our kids an iPad because this is something that is going to be significant in their lives. She pushed back on me. You did push back, didn't you?
Did. But that's the story of our life. Jeff has a grand idea, and I'm like, let me think about that for a second.
It has literally changed how our family has accepted technology and what we do with technology and how it is used as a tool and not controlled by the tool, almost revisiting a little bit of the conversation we had before. But again, also reiterating the whole intentionality of it. I'm not going to allow technology to control me. I'm going to control the technology that I want to use in my life to make it going forward. So and this leads to the question that I had for you. So a lot of times a record is looking back at what has happened. And one of the areas that I try to do is look forward to what do I want to keep a record of? What do I want to have in my life? How do you make that transition? What do you think about when you're like, okay, I've got the past, but now what do I do going forward?
Yeah, so genius. I almost wish I was related to you. So for me, when I built this system, obviously just hold the past, this is actually broken down into reflection and inspiration. So that's kind of look back and be here.
Yeah.
But the intention and protection is look forward and do something with it.
Yeah.
So for me, you can use a lot of things. I chose tarot, not because it's particularly occultish, but I needed something visual. I'm autistic, ADHD, OCD, all diagnosed. So I need something visual I can look at and kind of understand and just decipher, play with my mind, for lack of a better term. So for me, looking forward is about setting intentions, right? So again, you've got a reflection back, inspiration, kind of be where you are, and you've got kind of an intention. The next thing I do in the middle of the day is I do a reflection, kind of where I'm at in that day. So if we go back to yesterday, it'll make probably a little bit more sense. Where we're at in the day, and then an affirmation, which is kind of like, right, when you come in here and say an inspiration, but an affirmation is actually, you're sure of it. Not only am I here, right, with what am I inspired by, but I am something. Like yesterday, I'm a good friend because I understand others' needs and I'm flexible. I had a problem with a friend of mine who canceled on something. At the end of the day, I do a gratitude, which is I'm here and I'm here with everything, and a reflection. So, when you ask about like, how and when and where do you decide these things? For me, it was really about, well, what is that process? I hate to sound so clinical, but what does that process look like in my mind? And in the future is an intention.
Right.
And I needed a word for it, Jeff. I don't know how to say. It's like I need it. Well, what? And like even my spouse does not do plan. Plan is not in there. You know people I'm talking about.
That is not in the universe. Yeah.
How did you survive like this many years? Like the gas has been yelling at you for 6 hours that it's going to run out, and you're on the. How did you get here? Right. So an intention to not run out of gas is a lot easier than a reminder to get gas. Like I intend to get to school. I intend to get to school, so I need to get gas.
That is good. I want to write that down. An intention is a lot better than a reminder. That's really good.
Well, an intention is a kind reminder.
It's also a willingness. To me, it's the difference between something or someone else telling me to do something and me saying, oh, this is important and I want to do it today. I intend to do this.
Exactly. And if you guys remember the chart that my family uses weekly, again, I can give you a copy of this for your family if you want.
I would love it. Yeah, absolutely, in a heartbeat.
Just the color coding is inspiring.
Well, you'll have to write your own family values over here, because then the stickers go to those colors. But again, looking forward. Jeff talked about this just a second ago, versus thinking back. So we say feeling forward versus thinking back.
Wow.
So even when we're feeling forward,
thinking back. Oh, I like that a lot. Okay.
Oh yeah, because you can always think back, but you should never feel back.
Okay. Don't go back to that.
Yeah,
think on it.
Do not go back. It'll kill you. But even when you're thinking forward, you have to kind of stratify it. So for my spouse, visualizing it is like there's no commitment there. It's kind of like light intention. Internalize is, okay, I've been thinking about this for a while. This is something that's really important. This is where you actually start your streak, is the internalization forward when you're planning forward. And actualization, again, is I'm doing it now. Right? I hope that makes sense. I'm really weird about structure.
Completely makes sense.
I love it. So as a mom, what I'm thinking about is that you're talking about these different things that you've had diagnoses of, yet I am massively impressed and excited how you have figured out how your brain works, how you have embraced that, and then how you have gone through, even as you're talking about when you're like, I'm totally different than I was 7 years ago. I very much value and appreciate the process that you've gone through of understanding how to work with all of this, understanding. So I think sometimes we're afraid to give ourselves to something because of the bad things that might happen. And so it's like, well, if I ignore it, then the bad thing won't happen. Where I feel like you embraced recognizing the things that you were doing, and it sometimes went to that bad place of you're like, I weaponized it, but then still had the ability to be like, okay, this isn't the person I want to be. Nope. And instead of shunning all of the technology or all of the information, you were able to take that and say, okay, I need to change. How can I continue to use these tools and these things that I've learned from this place that I'm at that I don't want to be at anymore? How can I take that and change and be better and continue to move forward? And I really valued that as I've been reading the different things that you've put out there and have watched, and appreciate that you're willing to take that journey.
I mean, I hate to say this, but I'm so tired of waiting to grow up. I waited forever. You know how there's like, you can't wait to be 10 because it's two numbers. Then it's 16, then it's 18, then it's 21, then it's 25, then it's 30. And I kept thinking in every one of these, when does the adult show up? And
now I'm to the point that I'm like, I'm old enough. Why isn't the adult here? Now I'm past the part
I've buried my parents, right? I've buried my parents. I've done all that. So when? So I just had to come to terms, with I'm never going to get old. I'm going to always have this brain.
Yeah. And
this brain and me have got to work something out.
We've got to find a way to work together.
We've got to find a way, right? And, whether it be meditation, all the things I've done to really kind of, stitch together a belief system. But more than anything, to your point, Jamie's, I really always try to be profoundly honest about what I found in myself, because it's always a bridge forward to someone I haven't met yet, or a bridge back to someone who might have written me off. Mm-hmm. I remember when you did that, it made me feel like crap. Right. And like even writing a book, I mean, you guys have a book, and it's like when you put a lot of your story in a book, it's freeing. Like, okay, try to cancel me. I talk about drugs and jail, and it's in here. It's been in here, and it's been in a bookstore for years. Yep. So just try to do something with it. Right. And streaks should be keys to locks, not locks.
That's good.
We are going to use that right there. Keys to locks, not locks. Here's one of the streaks that I noticed that you do, and you may or may not think about this. And it's something that we talk about as far as living intentionally, and that is you every day review that particular and what do you call your board? Your visualization and also your actualization. Yeah.
Every day I look at the journaling big app, but the board for the family is weekly. So
weekly. Okay. See, so you've got Sunday. A daily streak of at least doing journaling at least one time daily, and then a weekly streak.
One of many streaks.
Yes.
Yeah, and you are a man of streaks.
And you know what? Actually, people ask me all the time, well, how many streaks do you have? And I intentionally track right around 31 streaks that I have on either a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. And it's to the point because of looking at successful individuals and people who have successfully actualized or operationalized their lives. I see there's there's not only consistency, and I kind of separate the two, consistency and consecutiveness, because you can be consistent in an action but not have it be consecutive. Whereas a consecutive action lends itself to like what you're doing. Okay, how do I feel? How did I feel today? What was it that I did? And then going forward. That is, I think, and why I want to bring this out is for all of our fellow streakers out there. The streaks are the floorboards of life. They're the things that I'm not going to drop below. They're the things that I'm going to stand on in order to reach for my goals and aspirations.
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard because to me, streaking has always been a double-edged sword. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, absolutely.
Because streaking lends itself to time management, and time management kind of is the holy grail of basically living and dying. But if you can somehow find a way to make your streaks almost have a level of equanimity to like you and your life, then it's not really a streak, it's life.
Yeah.
You know? Breathing is the ultimate streaking. You know?
Yes.
It's just like, you know, and like, you know, are you measuring every one? No, but the watch is, right? So I think it's super important that we're very flexible with the difference between, you know, consistent effort and streaking. Okay? Consistent effort is so different than consistent record keeping. It's an effort to write down and log how I'm feeling and when I'm actually not feeling good. Right? But I do it because it's important. And, you know, and just the other day, you know, God bless his soul, my spouse said to me, can I have the journaling app? Now, the journaling app's been around for 3 years, right? Now, spouse wants a copy, right? So all of a sudden, it was like, okay.
All right.
So there's something that happened that made me using just an affirmation. Like, I can't tell you, like, even the affirmations of the day, and people always talk about gratitude journaling. I'm like, yeah, but then you're just basically like glorifying everything you've got. Like, you have to do an intent. You know what I mean? It's these things work together.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other thing is, I'm going to go back real quick to what Jami said about diagnoses. You know, being diagnosed in my early 20s as obsessive compulsive behavior, it's probably easy for people to go like, oh my gosh, look at what you do. You're so obsessive compulsive. You must be, you know, heck to live with. Well, diagnoses, I think, in a lot of ways allow us to actually lean in and borrow what we need to and then lean out, right? There are certain things I do that I don't have compulsions. So like I'm pure O, they call it. So I don't have something that tells me, you know, do something. I just have the recursive thinking, which has nothing to do with cleaning or logging or anything else like that. When I got to actually start to explore the ADHD parts of my brain, well, I just have parts of that. You know, I don't have all of that either. And when I got to like the autistic part, I've always been influenced by my environment. Right. So light, sound, it's very aggravating to me. The dog barks like I lose my mind, and I have 3 dogs. So kind of leaning into kind of the diagnoses you have, but also I'll end with this, leaning back into what Jami said about my brain. It's like, I'm very visual. So like when I was building the system for my family, I had to say to myself, to my spouse, well, what does our life look like? So I put our life onto a map, right? You know, entities is who we were, health is like what's important to us, and our assets, what we collect, and, you know, whether it be something we buy or money in the bank, those are all, you know what I mean? So like, I had to start creating a way that we could see our lives and then just click into these things. Well, who are the people that we dealt with and that we are dealing with? What are the organizations? So if I wanted to see like Netflix or Amazon, right? And then going from that organization into the things that we purchase from that organization. But more important, your values kind of underpin all this, and your record keeping, right? So this is all streaking, but like just the act of visualizing our life has made people that I meet who, like I show this map to, they go, oh my gosh, that's it. I'm like, you've always had it, Dorothy, right? Click your heels, you're there. Do your own map. Get your own sticky board. And again, you can share both these things with your listeners or with your community, but take control and be as interested in you as Facebook is.
Wow. As you've shown us some of the different things, have you are those all programs of your own making, or have you taken and adapted things? How could people do what you're doing, but without your level of being able to program and everything else?
Yeah, so there's a great movement in the world, in technology specifically, called no code. Have you heard of no code?
No. I haven't heard of no code yet. No.
No code, low code is to the 2020s what mobile was to the 2010s.
Okay.
So everyone's maybe used a spreadsheet. Do we have any streakers that are kind of spreadsheet centric?
Oh,
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So low code, no code basically says there's you can create tools without coding. So one of my favorite low code, no code tools, I don't have anything to do with them, they don't pay me, is Airtable. Airtable is just a spreadsheet that's actually a relational database. So you can say, this meeting is linked to this person, this company. Actually, I spent this money on. So it links back to things. Okay. So it's like streaking, 3D streaking. Right?
Okay.
So I built them all, but anyone can. So most of the things I've showed you today are over on Airtable Universe, which is where people just post stuff for free for other people to use. But what I'd encourage your people to do is, before you go and download a Chris Dancy template, stop. Forget everything I just said. Please try to build it yourself.
Yeah.
Because again, so many people like, can I just get your system for managing my values? I'm like, no, because I'd have to give you my values.
Right. You've got to decide your own values.
I can't break my own like rule here.
Right.
What I see,
you guys know.
Yeah. Oh, we know exactly. Absolutely. Because that's one of the things we talk about is you can't adopt our streaks. I mean, you got to come up with your own streaks. They're what you need in order to become who you want to be.
Who you want to be. Yeah. And we can't decide what your laughably simple is. Only you can decide that. What one person's, walk around the block is another person's run 6 miles a day. Everyone has to decide what their own personal laughable simple is. And I guess that's what, as I've been able to read about you and get to know you a little bit better, the thing that I value the most is just that your willingness to take this journey and to learn from it. I just love that. I know I keep saying that, but I just love what you've learned from this. And I guess that's my thing. If I was to ask one last question, is that of all the data that you've collected on yourself and other people, and what would you say is kind of the most important thing you've learned about yourself in doing that?
I'm finite.
I'm finite?
I'm finite. I spent decades thinking I'm forever. And my actions here on earth are finite. And that puts a period on them. That makes them so much more profound than I ever considered. I used to think, well, this stuff just comes and goes. But no, it literally just goes. And, when a streak ends, there's a certain amount of grief. Right.
Yeah.
When a streak starts, there's a certain amount of optimism, right? Yeah. So this constant cycle of birth and death, renewal and grace that you get when you kind of let go of something, it's just so important. So like the most important thing I've learned is how finite I am, and how no matter how much I try, no matter what I do, no matter what I measure or what I collect or how it comes to be, it will end. Yeah. And that means the process of actually being involved and intentional in those creations were so much more important than the number of days I logged them.
I love that.
Chris, this has been absolutely phenomenal. All of our streakers out there are absolutely rejoicing in this. This is one of the podcasts that will be played again and again and again. And hopefully what we'll be able to do is from this and from what we've done is establish a kinship. I mean, I feel a kinship to you like none other guest that we've had. I hope that continues forward. Jami and I both love what you do and how you do it. Thank you so much for visiting us today.
Thank you
so
much.
Thank you. And everyone else, feel free to replay this again and again and to share it with your friends. As you look at what it is that Chris has done, remember to be intentional about who you are and what it is you choose to do. Keep a record of it, and keeping a record allows you to see back and also to go forward. And as you look at your community of people, it gives you an opportunity to expand and broaden that community, but also to support them and celebrate with them as you go forward in life. So thank you for that. And thank you, everyone. If you want to ask any questions of Chris or of us, please shoot us an email, Jeffrey, Jeffrey, @streakingmastery.com, or
Jami, Jami, @streakingmastery.com.
And Chris, how do they get a hold of you?
Oh my gosh, I'm just Chris at Chris. I know, right? I'm just Chris at chrisdancy.com. But literally, my phone number's on my website. So if you're one of these people who doesn't want to use technology, but most importantly, if you listen to the show and you feel inspired or you feel scared or you're alone, you're not. I literally pick up the phone for strangers all day long. My spouse will tell you my phone rings off the hook. I think it's so important. You can call me. Pretend it's the 90s. You can literally call me. I'd love to hear from you. And I promise no matter what, it'll be great.
Little postscript. Do you publish your life on the web? I mean, on the internet and everything. Does that ever, sometimes people say, well, I don't want Big Brother watching me. How do you respond to that?
This is between Big Brother and Big Mother. So, Big Mother to me is kind of the intentional record curation of what you value and what's important, where Big Brother is kind of the intentional for like weaponization and kind of finger pointing. So I try not to screenshot stuff because usually I'm trying to do something terrible with it, unless it's like an actual record or something I need to screenshot. So yeah, I mean, I understand that, I get it, but I'll just say this about kind of record keeping in general and being public. You know, if I were to see you guys as tax returns and your credit card receipts and get to weigh you every day and see what you eat, and you got to see all that about me, we'd probably be closer than liking each other's posts. So where I am pro safety, I'm post privacy. I think it needs to go. It didn't exist 100 years ago. No one ever even used the word, and it won't exist in the future. This slim margin where we're acting as insular beasts that somehow can live above everyone else by hiding certain things has got to go.
Wow. Absolutely. Well, thank you.
I could talk to you for a lot longer.
Yeah, and that may be one that we'll have to visit in the future. Chris, thank you so much for being on today. Everyone else, have a fantastic week, and as always,
keep streaking.
Keep streaking.
It's the little